Welcome to the Breath of Fresh Air Dental Podcast. Whether you're a seasoned practice owner, a new dentist, or an office manager looking to enhance your skills, this podcast is for you. Our friendly and knowledgeable hosts are here to answer your burning questions, address common pain points, and provide practical solutions to help you overcome any obstacles you may face. Our hosts, Amanda Demora and Sarah Hamlin, bring to the table lengthy careers in both clinical dentistry and practice administration. They now preside as the CEO and COO of Essential Dental Services.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Breath of Fresh Air podcast. I'm Amanda Demora.
And I'm Sarah Hamlin.
And today we're going to be talking about a bit of an end of the year checklist or to-do list for practice managers. I know myself, I always make a little list and have it digitally and in my paper planner of things that need to get done for the end of the year / beginning of the year. So we thought we've kind of been saving this to publish during December. So now is the perfect time.
Because also it's December, we're all in the holiday mode. We all want to be getting home and doing fun stuff with our families. So having this list set aside somewhere before you're rushing out for your holiday break it's good to have it ready to go so you don't have to think about it later.
Right. So the very first thing, obviously, as you're kind of closing out the year and whatever practice management software you're using, I always talk in EagleSoft terms, but running your kind of end of day, your very last end of day report, your end of month report, and then your end of year report, which is going to have a ton of stuff in there. And whatever is kind of important to you or the doctor, you can put aside for you and the doctor's meeting. But that's kind of step number one to physically end the year in terms of practice management software and things and accounting.
Yep, balancing all your payments and everything for the day and making sure your month is good. Like, just, set yourself up for success so you're not coming back after your holiday break, however long that might be, and coming back to a big pile of, oops, I need to make sure everything for last month is all finished. Like, no, just try to do that before you leave. Then you don't have it hanging over your head for when you come back.
Right. Our accountants were always kind of on top of us to do that. And we were always not scrambling, but a little bit, because they always wanted us to end the year like a day or two early, which I didn't like to do because I'm very much by a set schedule. But anyhow, so that's literally the very first thing. On my to-do list, I always made it a point to, so before we closed for holiday break or, right before the new year, I had my New Year's CDT code. So I was deleting codes that were getting deleted for the new year and adding codes that were getting added, as well as updating your office fees. So this was another thing that I always sat down with the doctors about and looked at a few different reports from different places on where our fees should be and which ones we kind of wanted to update, whether that was just across the board, a percentage across the board, or we usually broke it down and looked at individual fees because some stayed the same and some increased. So those are my two biggest things before we reopened for the new year, was making sure that codes and fees were where they needed to be.
Yeah. And let's clarify too that updating your fees and your codes shouldn't be something that you are trying to do on the fly in the last hour before you leave for your break.
No.
Hopefully you've given some thought, and hopefully, you will listen to this early enough here in the month of December that you can take some time to, have those discussions with your doctor and make some, educated decisions about how much you want to update your fees. So then right before you leave, it's easy to just go click that button and update them all the way that you want to, but you've already put in the brain work for that. So it should just be some easy updating in the software at that point.
Right. So pulling some reports in your software of your most used codes, definitely those need to be looked at first and updated appropriately. Next, I always, at the kind of end of the year, like I said, I love my paper planner, but I do both. I don't know why. I think I just love physical paper. I always have. Love writing, love journaling, and love my paper planner. So I use that and obviously my Google Calendar. But in my paper planner, I'm writing out all staff birthdays for the new year. And a week before the staff birthday, I'm writing that on my calendar to give myself time to get whatever we're going to get prepared, a cake, a gift, some kind of lunch or celebration, whatever your office is going to do. That way it's not sneaking up on you the day before.
Right. And I would also, sorry to interject here, but I would also say staff birthdays and celebrations has always kind of been a little bit of a pain point for Amanda and I. I really love celebrating staff and giving everybody, you know, the appreciation and the recognition that's due to them, because I do feel like that's a super important part of keeping good staff and, you know, being really genuine about, you know, your feelings for them and all of that is great, but it can get exhausting. And the reason it gets exhausting for us as practice managers or as doctors who are trying to stay on top of it is because, you know, you've got 10, 15, 20, 50 people to celebrate, and that ends up being 2 or 3 or 4 sometimes a month. And then you add in the appreciation days and the boss's day, and then you add in a Christmas present for everyone. Like, it turns out to be a lot of work. So I do think that the beginning of the year is a good time too for you to take a step back maybe and evaluate how you are celebrating everybody. Make sure it makes sense budget wise for the office, and make sure it makes sense for you sanity wise as well. If it is turning into too much and it's a joyless task for you, I think that staff is going to pick up on that. They're going to recognize that it's not really fun for you to be celebrating them, and that doesn't feel good either. So just take a minute to evaluate how you're doing it and make sure that it works for you. And the beginning of the year, when you're kind of starting fresh with everyone, is a good time to make changes to that. Just be very clear and transparent with people, I think, that you're making changes, and you're making changes across the board, and everyone starting in this year, we're going to celebrate birthdays a little bit differently, just so everybody knows what to expect and so nobody's feelings get hurt in the process.
Right, we talked about this a little bit in our how to avoid burnout episode, was start delegating the tasks that you don't really love to do. Start there if you're not good at delegation. And this was one of them. So maybe sharing the responsibility, maybe every staff member is responsible for one other. You have like a little tree going on, a little almost like a secret Santa, but for birthdays, everyone has someone else that they're responsible for during the year. So if that's something you don't enjoy, if you have a large office, that honestly does get overwhelming. And there's some creative ideas out there. Also on my planner was Office Manager Appreciation Month. One that often gets overlooked. Yes. So I write all of those down, and a month before them, or sometimes even more, I'm writing it on my calendar that it's coming up, because I used to always try to do something fairly big, you know, for those, like a special lunch and gifts, and the gifts are usually personalized, and that always takes a little extra effort, yes, on Etsy. Quarterly reports, if this is something that you are responsible for. So I was sending quarterly reports to the accountant. So I always put that on my calendar too, to send those over at the appropriate end of months with all the information that they were looking for, you know, production and collection and all of that stuff. Taxes. So if this is something else that you might be responsible for, I always put when quarterly taxes were due, and also your town as well. So paying, you know, local state real estate tax and property tax and other things like that. Definitely didn't want to fall behind there. So I always wrote those down. Employee benchmarks. My payroll software was pretty darn good at tracking most of these things, especially anniversaries. But for new employees, if you're wanting to do a 3-month review, I always put that on my calendar. Definitely the yearly anniversaries that matter. If, they're bumping up to 2 weeks vacation time, 2 years or 3 years or whatever it is, you want to get that on the calendar and make sure that you're updating their payroll and all that stuff appropriately so that they have the time off that they are owed.
Mm-hmm. Those things too, I think those are things that really tend to slip through the cracks. So being really intentional about taking the time to put them on there, because everybody does have a different anniversary date and they kind of just sneak up on you and slide by. Yeah, taking a moment to be intentional and marking those, I think, is helpful and important for sure.
Right. And we also kind of, to be eligible for 401k, you had to have worked there for a year. Mm-hmm. And then even after that, the enrollments were only January and July. So you really kind of have to be on top of those things to make sure that your employees are getting what is due to them or owed to them.
I mean, and the same thing for, any medical insurance that you might offer in your office. Like if they're only eligible after, their 90-day eval or however you have it set up in your handbook, then the open enrollment period only lasts usually for like a month after they're eligible. So making sure that you get that handled in a timely fashion too is really important.
Right. So those are mostly everything that I am writing on my planner. We in my calendar, we might come up with a few more, but other end of the year items is reviewing your KPIs yourself and with your doctor. Obviously, I'm kind of always pulling those reports myself and then, making sure they're organized and then presenting them in an organized fashion to the doctor. Mm-hmm. And a final payroll of the year. And your accountants might have ideas on how they want you to run that, but
yeah, but usually you just want to make sure that whatever day that however your payroll gets processed, you make sure that last one of the year gets processed in the correct year.
Yes.
The last thing you want is for you to try to have it processed on the 31st and have the 31st be a Saturday. So then it pushes out, till the 2nd of the new year. Like you just don't want to get stuck in that predicament. So just take a few minutes to look at the calendar, make sure everything's going to work out the way that you and your accountant needs it to for that final payroll.
Right. So besides those planner items, I think getting all your reports and your documents ready and then setting aside some time to meet with the doctor. We already mentioned, making sure fees and that discussion has happened well before you're about to leave for the holidays. But meeting with your doctor at the end of the year to kind of wrap up and go over how the year went and plan for the new year is pretty darn important. Otherwise, you just have no benchmark for anything. So at this meeting, kind of something that I was presenting was, of course, the practice's financials for the year, and that I always kept a spreadsheet of our kind of like a rolling 3-year basis of our monthly and yearly production and collection, just so we can compare year to year. Hopefully that is increasing every single year. And if not, that's definitely something to talk about.
Right.
So going over that, and then, just kind of looking over, like we already mentioned, your KPIs with the doctor, kind of seeing where you're standing with staff salaries, all your other expenses, and are they too high? Where can we cut costs? What areas do we need to look at here?
Yep. Also, if Amanda and I were talking about this as we were preparing for this episode, but there's a lot of things that I think people wait to the end of the year to evaluate that definitely could be evaluated earlier in the year. But the end of the year kind of brings about this sense of, okay, it's time to start fresh in the new year. Let's look at, all of the things that happened last year, and definitely gives you a good benchmark of that nice 12-month period to kind of evaluate things. But one thing that we also had on the list was taking the time to evaluate your insurance contracts and making sure that everything that you're getting out of being in network with the insurance is profitable for you, is beneficial for you and your office. I might argue that that's something that could be done a different time of year, because I do think it takes a lot of brain power, a lot of report pulling, and a lot of kind of evaluating. But if you need a push to do that, the end of the year and kind of looking at the last 12 months could be helpful for you. So consider that maybe something that you could add to your list if you're needing something to do in your last couple weeks at the office.
Right. And I think people definitely always kind of think in terms of an actual calendar year, but it doesn't always necessarily need to be, like Sarah said. But looking back at the year as a whole and looking at your various insurance contracts and maybe what your write-off totals were for the year can kind of give you a baseline and
of where you wanted to be and where you need to be for future months too. Like I said, I think sometimes people just need a push to do it, and the end of the year kind of seems to give that push that we need sometimes to just look into these things and make sure that the new year is going to come about the way that we want it to.
Right. Another talking point with your docs is salary. So you're going to look at these kind of reports too from your profit and loss and see where salaries are at. Are they high? Are they low? We always kind of gave raises yearly and kind of at different times for everybody. But that was another thing I kind of had on my calendar too, was when everyone was due for a raise and a review. Another thing, updating your employee handbook. That really should be done yearly for sure. But if there's anything you want to change in there, be that vacation time rules, holiday pay, whatever it might be, that should be looked over every year and handed out to your employees every year so that they have a copy and they're looking it over and none of this is coming as a surprise to them.
Right. And they're acknowledging those updates and changes. I think it's also, you should have them acknowledging that they got the handbook, but then also acknowledging any updates, having them have a signature on file or some kind of way to prove that they acknowledge that they got it, so that if anything is to happen in the future, they can't say, oh, I didn't know that you changed that.
Right. Aside from meeting with the doctor, or maybe they want to be in on this too, but blocking off vacation time for the doctor, your clinical team, whomever else, your admin team too, and also CE time. So we always, every 2 years, we had someone come in and do CPR training in the office. So we always kind of picked that day, which day we were going to kind of shut down for a half day, which day we were attending a local dental convention with CE and things like that. And maybe some other just in staff appreciation days or outings or whatever you want to do, especially if you're booking pretty dang far ahead on your calendar when on your schedule. I mean, when Sarah and I were looking this over ahead of time, I'm like, I don't think December 31st is the time to plan when your office is going to be closed. Hopefully you're booking out kind of far.
Yeah. I mean, I think to me, I just think, you should for sure be looking at least 6 months out. Obviously, we all know that kind of in dental, you're always kind of working 6 months ahead with the schedule for hygiene patients anyhow. So getting at least 6 months ahead of those days that you're going to be closed. In my opinion is it's always easier for us to fill a day up with patients than it is to have to call and move patients out of a day. So I would rather close those days off ahead of time and then open them as we get closer if we need to. But yeah, definitely evaluating your holiday time for next year and closing, if you're always going to be closed the week between Christmas and New Year's, go look at that schedule now and get it closed, because there's always going to be that patient that says, oh, can you just book my next 3 hygiene visits? I can come in whenever. And then they always end up on the day that you end up being closed. So yeah, just take a second to poke through and get those major ones closed off at the very least. Or if you do have other dates in mind, like Amanda said, get those other ones closed off too. And your future self will definitely thank you for taking the time to do that. So one other thing that I would recommend is taking some time to think about things that can't necessarily go on a list, or maybe could go on a list, but you'd have to get pretty nuanced with it. And that's just setting yourself up to come back in the new year ready to go. So for me, that was things like starting a new folder on my desktop for 2024 and starting a new January end of day folder that I scanned my end of day reports into, or grabbing all of my paper invoices that I had in the drawer and putting them in a box and labeling it 2023 and getting the 2024 folder ready to go. Like if there's any kind of organizational things like that you can do to kind of get yourself ready to go for when you come back in. I personally really love the holidays. And so right before it was time to go out of the office for our holiday break, I would always be super excited and in the best mood to celebrate the holidays. And coming back in January was always hard for me because I just am sad that holiday fun time is over. So coming back into my workspace in particular, being organized and ready and already set up for me to go was really helpful. So I think just take a second to evaluate your personal situation and make sure there's nothing that you need to do or want to do. You know, get yourself a new 2024 calendar set up, all of that kind of fun stuff too, to just make sure that you can come in and kind of hit the ground running in January instead of trying to wrap up 2023 and facing 2024.
Yes. Another thing that I was responsible for was sending over any large purchase data to the accountants because they want that for depreciation schedules and all this stuff. So if that is your responsibility, I always tried to keep large equipment purchases in one folder. So this wasn't like, hey, what did we buy? And it wasn't kind of like a scramble. So know whatever benchmark they're wanting to cut that off at, like any purchases over, I don't know, $1,500 or whatever they're wanting. Just know that and be keeping track of it so it's handy for them. Another thing that's not necessarily an end of the year thing, but you can also be writing this on your calendar, is licensing expiration dates for the clinical team. I always wrote that on my calendar a month ahead of time, and about a month ahead before they were expiring, I would let everyone know to make sure to renew them. I mean, you can lead a horse to water, but just a little gentle reminder never hurt anybody. And then obviously once they're just about to be expired, make sure you're collecting them all from everybody and displaying them in the office as well, the updated ones.
One thing I would say about this list too is that keep in mind that not all of this has to be done necessarily at the end of the year.
Right.
Because sometimes I think we look at this list and we're like, oh my gosh, this is such a long list and I just am ready to get out of here. And all of that, like keep in mind that some of this is all important things to do once a year, whether that's once a year every March 1st, whether that's once a year every September 15th, like whatever works for you is great. Try to be doing it all at least once a year. Again, like we kind of talked about earlier, the end of the year just kind of provides a good push for people to do it. But there's definitely room for most of these things to be done other times of the year as well. So if you're looking at the list or you're listening to us talk and you're like, that is so much to do, I can't do that all in the next 30 days. Like, don't worry. It doesn't all have to be done in the next 30 days, but just make sure that you set aside some time at some point to evaluate all of those things.
Right. I think at the very beginning, we kind of talked about the most important things, which were closing your practice management software for day, month, year, and getting, reports and whatever your accountant is wanting and those type of things that literally legally need to be done.
Yes.
And then,
yes. And those things that are actually time sensitive to the end of the year.
yes, yep. So all of that, but the rest really can kind of be done at any point. But I think people are always looking at January as a fresh start. And prior to January, you're making your goals for the new year. So that's kind of why we were compiling this whole list.
I think also taking some time to do a little celebrating or patting yourself on the back. You know, you made it through another year. It might not have been the easiest year, might not have been the best year, or it might have been the best year. Your numbers might have been the best that they have ever been. You might have had some really good months. Like all of those things, take some time to kind of look at those numbers while you're checking things out and give yourself a little pat on the back, because you more than likely you really deserve it. You know, nobody's always going to be tooting your horn necessarily. And a lot of the other staff don't always see the numbers in the same way that you and the doctor do. So just take that time to kind of give yourself a little bit of credit. A lot of times too, things don't come up on these reports. Like you might have had a really tough year for staffing. And that's not going to show on any end of year report. But if you've got a solid crew here at the end of the year and you don't have an ad out for hiring, like that's something to congratulate yourself about for sure. And that's not going to be on any report or any numbers that you can look at necessarily. But those are things to kind of evaluate too and give yourself credit, or realize like, wow, it was a really rough year for something, you know, next year I want to do better at this, or I want to take some CE to learn more about this so next year can go more smoothly, you know, kind of taking those evaluations too. It's a good time for that, for some self-reflection as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that a little bit of self-reflection and setting goals for yourself, be that personally and at the office as well. I kind of always used to think about ways just that I could improve and how I could be there a bit better for my team. We were looking at another list, and one of the items was kind of sending out a survey to the staff, and this can have a lot of things on it. Going back to the celebrations and birthdays and things, on this survey that you send to the staff, you can kind of get a little more insight from them on how they might like to be celebrated or some of their favorite things. You might not know that about every single person, and you can kind of get a lot of information from that and maybe what they're wanting to see for the new year too. So I think the end of the year is a good time to send something like that out to them. That way you have it all gathered for the new year.
Yep. Oh, what else? I think that kind of sums it up. I am ready for a Christmas break now, just looking at this list.
Yes, me too. But yeah, I think that just about wraps up our list. Hopefully everyone kind of finds that helpful. Take a few items, take all the items, make your own little checklist, and feel good about heading into 2024.
We hope you guys all have a wonderful holiday break. And we'll see you back in 2024.
Yep. Bye, everybody.
Bye.